Hello. I was tempted to say good morning because it's the morning here in BC as I record this. But I don't know what time you'll be watching it, so who knows? But it's good morning, anyways. And this is my video for Mercury ingress into Gemini, which has just taken place. Mercury is already in Gemini. Um, Gemini is one of the home sign, yang home sign of Mercury. So we have a nice, well dignified Mercury happening. Um, and I think there's a few things that is interesting to kind of take note of with this Mercury and Gemini transit in 2021. First of all, got the dates written out here. On May 10th, Mercury is going to be conjoining the North Node. On May 13th, Mercury is going to be perfecting a trine to Saturn and Aquarius. And on May 30th, Mercury will station retrograde, so we'll also get a Mercury retrograde in Gemini. So, um, there's a couple things about this, is that we just recently had Mars go through Gemini. And Mars is the planet, of course, the god of war, all about cutting and severing and boiling and chopping. There's something about Mars that was like, Gemini is a sign that has to do with multiplicity and variety and novelty and stuff like that. And Mars, Mars is what you would call peregrine in Gemini, in that it's not really the home of Mars. It's not really like the natural place for Mars to be. It doesn't have any particular dignity one way or another. It's not. It's kind of a neutral place for Mars. And there's this general kind of sense with Mars and Gemini. I kind of felt like of kind of like separating, eliminating, whittling down, basically, of like if you had like many different options, Mars and Gemini kind of having this like, separating the wheat from the chaff kind of thing, like separating off all the things that aren't going to work or that you don't want, and kind of pick like narrowing down your options a little bit, right? Or um, yeah, I mean, it all depend too. Like if you're looking at your own natal chart, which house Gemini is for you. So I'm kind of used to thinking about, like I kind of used this time to sort of like get clear of some sort of like addiction kind of stuff, because it was an eighth house thing. So I spent the time like, there's all these things about like addictions and dependencies, and Mars being this force to sort of like either separate out of that, or if you're still hanging on, it might become sort of inflamed, or you might see problems around it, kind of thing. Now the thing about Mercury is interesting, because Mercury, rather than being like this sort of like negative force of Mars, which is trying to separate and cut off, Mercury has this quality that's a little bit more like negotiating, right? Mercury is sort of like the communication that happens between one side and the other side, and Mercury is well dignified in Gemini, meaning that rather than Mars coming through and like cutting through all these different variety of different things, Mercury actually likes the variety of different things, because Mercury, if you think about Mercury as a planet, like Mercury is always, it's close to the sun, but it goes retrograde more often than any other planet. It goes retrograde like 3 times in a year, and it's always kind of going back and forth, and it's sort of like the back and forth of communication. And Gemini kind of represents this quality of having diversity and novelty and lots of different options. And I think one of the things I think is that you've got the North Node in Gemini there this year, and the thing about the North Node is that in certain schools of astrology, in what you'd call Indian or Vedic or Jyotish, if I'm getting the pronunciation right, astrology, at one point in the time they actually considered both the North Node and the South Node to be malefics, right? So I don't necessarily I don't subscribe to this thing about the North Node be representing like this is like your purpose that like you work towards what the North Node is, and then you get all the good karma or something. It's more what the North Node does represent, generally speaking, is a kind of area of increase of like it kind of um like the North Node and the South Node are kind of like magnetic poles, and there's a kind of a positive attraction with the North Node that will create increase there. And I think that when Mercury um, conjuncts the North Node, it might be kind of interesting because we're getting like um, this kind of like mercurial thing, which it might. I think when we had the Mars there, there was this sort of like cutting through and narrowing down, and we might just kind of like have narrowed down to one option. But I think Mercury might have the quality of maybe casting doubt on that. Like if you think you've kind of got the one thing, the one option you want to go with, Mercury might come in and say like, hey, like what about this other option? What about that other option? And it might start bringing now that we might start bringing in more of these different kind of avenues that we hadn't considered, and we might see. And I think it's also I mean, I'm just doing this video on Mercury, but we're also getting Venus coming in here, like maybe about a week afterwards. And if Mars is all about cutting and separating, Venus is more about joining, right? Coming together. So it's sort of like, it's a bit like the wax on, wax off thing. So it's sort of like, like we've just had Mars kind of like clear through a bunch of stuff, and then it's sort of it's like stuff maybe coming growing back. Like once you've kind of chopped through all the weeds, you pulled out all the weeds, but now you're having something else grow in there, right? Um, that could be a kind of image or metaphor to use, especially when you consider like Venus coming into Gemini with Mercury. Um, However, there could be some kind of negative kind of qualities to this, even though Mercury is well dignified in Gemini, and that I think that Gemini can kind of have this quality that could be a little bit like, I don't like to use like diagnostic language, but I think it can be a little bit like ADHD, like kind of easily distracted, like you're especially that's the whole thing about like you're narrowing down on one specific thing that there, especially when you get Mercury in the North Node, it could be like all these different kind of distractions that might be throwing you off. That you're trying to focus on one particular task or topic, and then there's all these you get distracted by the passing sparkly objects or that kind of thing, right? There's some. I think though that what we also get, which is interesting, is there's going to be a trine to Saturn shortly after. The trine to Saturn perfects in the 13th of May, and this is the trine to Saturn is interesting because Saturn is traditionally the ruler of Aquarius, so you've got good dignity with Saturn. Gemini is traditionally the ruler of Mercury is traditionally the ruler of Gemini, so you've got good dignity with Gemini. And so you put these two things together, planets very strong because they're in their own dignity, and Mercury getting kind of jacked up a little bit from the North Node, whether that's a positive influence or not. It might not. It might be a little bit distracting, or like I was saying, Mercury might kind of cast some doubt on this sort of singular kind of notion. But I think there's something positive that could come out of the trine with Saturn, because if one of the things that Saturn represents is the opposition, right? Each of these planets were connected with one of the aspects, and that Saturn was connected with the opposition. Um, and so Saturn was also kind of said to be like the wall, right? Where you had this kind of wall or division or barrier, and that could be seen as either between self or other, the good guys or the bad guys, our side of the story, your side of the story, this argument, that argument kind of thing. And Mercury was more of like the negotiator that would communicate between. So I think that there could be, like, if there's certain areas where there are conflicts or divisions, or there's also Saturn can represent this kind of like blind spot, this area of ignorance where we're not, this the whole thing about like us and them, right? Where it's like, why is there this separation between us and them, and why is it that there's this kind of polarization happening where we identify with this, but those people are the other people that are like bad, and we don't talk talk to those people, and we kind of this kind of alienation that happens. That I think, if anything, there's a positive opportunity here where Mercury, the messenger, the communicator, can come in and start to sort of like draw some lines of communication between these two different points of view. Like you've got the opposing forces, but you've got like kind of like the ambassador or the negotiator or the mediator coming in to kind of like communicate. And what Mercury tends to do is it sort of like does have this thing about casting doubt, where if you're really solidified in one specific position, Mercury comes in and says, but like, what about this? Like, have you considered that? Or like, it might start kind of poking holes in these ideas or beliefs that we're really solidly clinging to. And I mean, that for some people that could be a bit threatening, maybe, to if you're really hedged in on a certain side of the story or a certain position. And it's one of these things where I think, like, if you communicate with people who have a different point of view, it's like, in order, they're not going to consider your point of view unless you consider their point of view too, right? Like, it has to be a bit of a give and a take. And I think that quality of exchange is also very mercurial. It could have something to. Mercury is kind of like the trader, the merchant, the deal maker kind of thing. So it could be a good time for making deals and negotiations, especially if you factor in Saturn. There's like, making a deal about something. There's a certain long term commitment, right? Like, if you're making a commitment or a plan of the long term, and you're kind of negotiating around it, this might be a good kind of transit for doing that kind of stuff. Um, or Saturn also has to do with really serious, heavy kind of stuff, and there might be things that we just like don't talk about because it's kind of serious or solemn or something like that. And with the Mercury trine there, you've got a really well dignified Mercury in trine to this well dignified Saturn, and there might be opening up communication and dialogue around things which we consider to be serious or heavy. And so I think there's lots of positive things coming out of it, but there might be some risks too, because I think with the influence of the North Node, there might be, if anything, there could be a problem with too much of it. There could be like talking too much. There's gonna be that's one thing that the North Node influence could be. Would just be like, oh my god, just shut up already, right? Like, you're just, like, do we really have, like, we've been over this already? Do you have to keep going around in circles in this conversation? Like, that could be something that could be part of the North Node, which might kind of exaggerate it a little bit. But overall, I think this is one of the better transits that we've had so far this year. However, this is the thing, is that once you get to the end of May 30th, then you get Mercury stationing retrograde. So it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of, we go over. We will. There's something about it where it's like Mercury's not done with this particular topic, with this particular conversation, with this, especially with Saturn, the influence of Saturn. This is like committing to some kind of decision or long-term plan or commitment. And then it's like rewinding, going back over the details. What did you miss out? What are you really sure about this? And then, maybe all the different doubts and uncertainties, and have you considered that option and this option? This is all coming in with Mercury and Saturn. And I mean, you also get Venus coming in there as well, hitting off the same things. Venus on the North Node and Venus in a trine to Saturn. But I thought I'd just kind of stick to Mercury and the Mercury transits right now. So these are my thoughts, anyways, today for Mercury in Gemini.